as you've been hearing about, you know, we do child protection, we have to remove children from very unsafe environments, we have to take those things through court, we have to develop plans for children, we have to monitor risk for children, and it's kind of, you know, I could give the National Audit Office a run for their money on bits of paper that we have to comply with. We could paper the walls between us, I think. And as you've been hearing, every time something happens in children's services, there's another bit of paper, another policy, another way to do things that comes about. So the staff were really unhappy for all those reasons. And they'd had a restructure the year before I started in this role. I was in the authority, but in a different place at that time. And they were unhappy with this restructure to the point that when I took over, I banned the word restructure, because it was really anxious time for people. They hated what had happened. They felt they hadn't been included in the planning, so it was really difficult for them. We had a number of issues with the court, because we spend a lot of time in court getting care orders for children, and it felt like there were so many problems to the point that I had a chair in the local court that had my name on it, because I was back and forth to that court so many times, and they'd ring me at 4 o'clock and the judge demanded me to be there by 4:15, and it's like, Your Honour, I've got to travel through traffic. I'll be there when I get there. So the profile of the service internally was really bad. So we were seen as overspending, we were seen as very negative. Externally, we were being seen as not providing services efficiently. Other partner agencies didn't always understand what we were doing. And I also took over the job. I will never forget this moment when the chief exec said to me, "Welcome to your new job, Trace. I'm not investing in your service." I thought, right, okay then. So we'd had a poor inspection the week after I took over, and I started my job on the 1st of April. Never start a job on the 1st of April. So 7 days later, it's like, oh, okay then. But apart from that, everything was great. We had a happy workforce. Everybody loved coming. It was just awful. People often ask me when I do these things, would you do it again? And I always have to think, well, it kind of depends what day of the week it is, really, whether I would or I wouldn't, because it was the hardest I have ever worked, ever, in my careers across health and social care. And so what we had to do was we had to develop change quickly. And so I like to think I remained calm, and I have to say that was mostly calm, because at the same time as I was having to make these changes in service provision, make these changes for staff, we still had to deliver those services to those very at-risk children. So the worst case scenario, as you've been hearing, is if we get it wrong, a child could die. If we get it wrong, a child could be injured. And so that was kind of my risk threshold that I was dealing with. And I've always worked from a position of priorities, and in social care my priorities have always been I prioritise my staff group, because without my staff group the job doesn't get done, and I also always prioritise children, young people and their families where appropriate, because we don't always leave children in their families. So what we did first of all, we listened to staff. They were not used to being listened to, so they kind of went through the rhetoric about the restructure to the point that I said, that's it, no more restructure words. What else can we learn from it? And I kind of let it carry on for so long, because as we've been hearing, you do have to let them be unhappy. But there comes a point where that's not helpful, because they're just kind of going back, and social workers are really good at going back over things. And I think that's because we spend so much of our life looking through case histories at what has gone wrong and what can we do better. So I think it was that kind of thing. And I kind of thought, what could I do that are quick wins? So I found out about 10 staff didn't have good mobile phones. So we ordered 10 mobile phones for quick wins. Guess how long they took to come? 10 weeks. I could have gone down the high street faster and got 10 phones, but because you have corporate procurement and you have to go through certain channels and all those sorts of things, for all those auditing type approaches, don't get me wrong, we had to kind of try and win those quick wins, and we didn't do it. The other problem we had was they were split over 2 sites, the staff, so they weren't all together. So I said to my chief exec, who wasn't going to be spending any money on me, please can you put us all in one place? And when I thought about that, I thought, well, that's good, because then in about 6 months we might get there. But yeah, we actually moved in 8 weeks. And that is like warp speed for a local authority, because they never do things that fast. You have to go through lots of processes that make it quite difficult. And also what had happened is that my predecessors, and in fact quite a number of them, had never sat with the staff group. And in my local authority that I was working in at the time, we were actually 15 miles away from where these teams were. So I said to my chief exec, I'm not going to be sat in those offices over there. I'm going to be sat with my staff group. It's open plan office. I didn't have an office. I just sat with them. So if they weren't happy, they could tell me. So that was how I kind of started shifting it around. And what I absolutely did not do was change services to plan for that re-inspection, because social care should never be about inspection. It should be about the children and young people that we're working for. So I had to kind of keep stopping people going, oh no, you're answering to an inspection procedure there. That's not what you're doing. What is the outcome that we want for a child? So we had to do a lot of work around that. It took quite a lot of time. And the other problem we had was we knew what A looked like, where we were, but we kind of weren't sure what B, C, D, E and F was looking for. So it was kind of a time of change without any parameters around that change. Does that make sense? We weren't moving from one box to another. We were working as a whole team to move. And everybody in that team has different ideas about how that should happen. There was also what could only be described as a lack of trust and suspicion about change, which is the polite version of what was really going on. There were no faith in managers, and also in local authorities, as you probably know, staff at senior level, they are responsible to the chief exec, but we're also responsible to members who are voted in members of the council. So I also spent a lot of my time in council meetings explaining what was going on, but I felt it was important that they actually understood the work of the service, because they didn't, or at least some of them didn't. And also we considered the barriers at all levels in the service, and it goes back to what we've been saying today really. If it's a problem for a member of your staff, it's a problem for you, because without that resolution, it's just going to get worse. So your first question, because I don't like the sound of my own voice, particularly when I haven't got much of one left. One of the biggest drains for staff is the barriers. It's the same at home. When you have a door handle that keeps dropping off every time you try and open it, it's a frustration, but you don't actually get a screwdriver out and put it back, and then it's all resolved. So what do you think, if you're a manager, your staff group, so those frontline workers or those people that are doing the business for you, what do you think your staff group would say are the barriers in your organisation? You've got a few minutes, because I don't believe in 10 minutes to do this. Is that okay? You'll be unsurprised to hear that there were a lot, no 45, never mind 45, I was dealing with a lot of barriers. And that was key really to us trying to understand from a workforce point of view. I had my own barriers, members, chief exec, MPs, all the time, on my ear, blah, 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 all the time. So I used to try and kind of sing them out. Can I say that in public? Because my workforce were the priority. So that was what I was looking for. I'd love to stand here and say to you, there's a theory behind this, you know, there's Vanguard, there's science, there's all the rest of it. But I didn't do any of that. I simply trusted my staff group to do the job they were employed to do. Nothing more than that. I won't lie to you, I had my fingers crossed, my hands over my eyes, all sorts of things during this time, because, you know, bottom line, children are at risk. That is what I was working to. So there was a certain level of anxiety, and I will admit I didn't sleep too great for a little while. What we found was one of the biggest barriers, which I know we've kind of talked a bit about today, is communication. And never mind location, location, location. It's communication, communication, communication. Thank you so much. And what we found was that, you know, we all learn differently. We all hear things differently. You know, you're sat in a room of however many people. All of you will take something different from today. You will have heard it slightly differently. You will interpret it through your own experience, those sorts of things. So what we set up, as a head of service, I used to stand on a Monday morning, 10 o'clock for 15-ish minutes and talk to the staff. It was called catch-up. In my head, it was called Monday's Moans and Groans. Because it was either, to begin with, it was things about, you know, it's too hot, it's too cold, too many windows, not enough chairs, all those sorts of things. But by now, we'd moved everybody into the new environment. So the catch-up then progressed into other people doing the catch-up. So they might have a story that they wanted to tell, they might be being sponsored to do a fun run, children's services staff spend their life raising money for children. Having worked all day for children, they then run ridiculous amounts of miles to kind of raise money more for children. So we did a lot about that. We also had updates from other organisations. If the police had a specific investigation going on that they needed help with, they would pop in and explain this to us, because we're out there in the community, we see things that are changing, those sorts of things. So it kind of gave us different things. It just gave us a chance to sit down. If we had compliments, I would make sure I told the service about the compliments. The staff who had got personally these compliments would never let me tell them by name. So I always used to say, somebody in the room, and I used to go and stand behind them. Not pointing, just stand behind them and walk away. So they kind of got a picture of it in the end, because we were trying to encourage that positive approach. The job is really hard, but there's lots of really positive things that you're doing. I also had a broken record approach. So I had a broken record of what we were doing, how we were doing, why we were doing, to members, to politicians, those sorts of things. Different ones internally, different ones externally, and different ones to staff. You have to stick to your message. Whatever that message is, you have to be consistent, because if you move too much at once, it gets really complicated for people. I was also lucky enough to get a young man called Scott King. Anybody heard about Scott King? He's a young man who had what can only be described as a dreadful time as a looked after child, not in Monmouthshire, and he was able to tell his story. And because I wanted, my social workers knew what it was like. They worked in this all the time. They came, but I made sure the chief exec went, I made sure members went, I made sure finance attended, I made sure transport attended, HR, IT, whoever I could get there to listen to. You're helping us, because part of our barriers were HR, were finance, were IT. And I tried to get them to understand that it's about Scott King, or whoever it is in Monmouthshire who is Scott King. And it's about delivering services. So if we've got delays here because HR haven't sent the letters out for recruitment, or it takes 8 weeks to get a mobile phone and all the rest of it, that has an impact on those people. And members found that really helpful. And there was a lot of people crying by the end of it, and that wasn't how I hoped it would go, but people were very upset. I found myself handing tissues out. It was terrible. But they really got a lot from it. As I said, I engaged members who had county council responsibility and scrutinised our work, got them to come and spend time. Obviously, you couldn't sit a councillor down and say, this is Joe Bloggs, this is their story, this and this and this, because it breaches confidentiality. But in general, social workers were able to talk about the types of things they did. And that was very helpful for members. They found it very useful. We also used anonymised case studies just so they could understand what we were doing, really. I had a lot of internal discussions, two that came to mind when I was talking about this. One of the finance officers, who was very senior, not anything to do with children's services, said to me, if it costs such a lot of money to transport a child, why don't you just move the child's school? So the scenario is, you've got a child who's in foster care, you've taken them away from an abusive situation, their only sort of continuity in life at that point is their school. And I will not ever move a child from a school, because you've got to keep an attachment somewhere. That's how we all learn, is about attachment. So I was kind of dealing with those sorts of requests, and also the other one I got, which is always my favourite. If it costs so much to take a case to court, then why do you do it? Well, it's the legal process, the child's at risk, what else do you want me to do? So it was kind of, and I think, because I talked to the staff group about it, I said, why am I being asked questions like that? And I think social workers live in this little world of social work and don't offer, and think that the rest of the world understands it, and they don't think they do. So we had to do a lot of work with the wider organisations to understand how they did, how they understood what we did, why we did. Threshold is a word in social care that nobody can agree on, because it's so many variables to it. And what we also found was that sometimes we weren't believed, because although the staff on the ground were evidencing all of these things, they weren't believed because it was the staff that was telling senior people. It was like, okay, so I got an organisation in called DNA Definitive for a very short space of time, and they used the example of the mobile phones, and I did an event to try and help the staff, and it was kind of the point where I was drawing the line under the words about reorganisation, restructure, those sorts of things. And I got Sam Warburton, who's a rugby player, in to talk to the staff, because if you ever listen to Sam talk about leadership on a rugby pitch. I had absolutely no idea what was involved in line-outs, tries, the whole thing. It was fascinating. But I was trying to get social workers to think wider than social work. And if you're in Wales, you practically have to sign up to love rugby anyway. And they really enjoy rugby. And it turns out that, you know, it's a really good thing. It's just I happen to know somebody who knew Sam. Nothing more than that. So we, at this event, you know, Sam got us a really nice venue in a really, really nice 5-star hotel. We don't get out very often in children's services. Give us a cake, give us a cup of tea, and if there's a sticky pad, we're really happy. It's kind of that sort of thing. So they were like, they had a great time. And after Sam had done a talk, he had photos done with people and he signed things for people. So it was really positive. But at that event, we had written down every phone call that was made to get those 10 mobile phones, every email, every meeting to get those 10 mobile phones. And we kind of rolled it out on wallpaper, and it was kind of from there to about the end of your table there. And that was just the phone calls. You know, never mind the emails or the meetings. It was that so much bureaucracy involved. And in the meantime, I was sending stuff out without any support because they couldn't ring if they needed the police. So it was that sort of risk stuff that I was trying to do, really. We also developed a new IT system. I ran a competition to name it, and if your Welsh is good, you'll all know what plant means. It means child, something you've learnt today. So I ran a competition. I just went out my own pocket, bought a few M&S vouchers, ran the competition. The staff designed the IT system, and I said it's like this. You put up or you shut up with whatever system you have. If you don't want to engage, that's up to you. IT is not everybody's, you know, boat. Not everybody's interested in it. And I think the time I realised that was a success was when a worker came to me. She said, Trace, I've just made this child looked after. And I'm like, great, good job, well done. She said, no, you don't get it. It was so quick. I checked 3 times that I'd done it properly. Because last time it used to take me like 15 minutes to do the job. And so I thought, it's okay then. Because what we're trying to do is reduce the clicks so that staff could actually go and see the child rather than be clicking in the system. We also trialled the use of tablets for staff so that they could go out and scan paperwork, bring it back, put it in the system instead of bringing the bit of paper back, scanning it through in a paperless office into the system, taking it back to the foster carer. It didn't work, so we had to come up with new ways of doing things. We had one particular team manager who was on her knees, so we gave her a sabbatical, and I said, what do you want to do? She said, I want to renew the policies. Last person I would ever think would want to renew the policies, but she did. She had 6 weeks. She went home to her children every evening at the right time, i.e. 5 o'clock. She had a rest, she had a break, and she sorted out a problem for me that I can't, I was like, well, who's going to do this? Who's going to, because it's always a thing that goes down the list. And she sorted all those policies and procedures for us. We worked to reduce waste activities, that's what you've been hearing about. It is true, for 10 quid, there's about 10 bits of paper and about 15 minutes of your life for a young person to get to an interview or whatever. So I stopped all that. And they used to go, if there was no other manager in the room, they'd bring it to me and go, Trace, will you sign this? No, take it away, get the 10 quid and go and give it to that child. And it was a real different way that they were working. And they said, are you sure? Yeah. If something happens, I'll take the back for it. But go and give the 10 quid to the child. And it was constantly around those sorts of things that was giving them a bit of a, they're a bit anxious, but they thought it was quite good this. So it was quite good. We got them engaged. I ran quizzes. I had to do a finance workshop. So I did quizzes for it, and in between questions of how does Good King Wenceslas like his pizza? Absolutely. Was questions about finance, costs of placements, those sorts of things. I had 2 of our finance officers do the adding up, and it was 5 points for a quiz question like Good King Wenceslas, 10 points for a social care question. And what cracked us up completely was it was only 5 or 10s, even I can add 5s and 10s. But they, as accountants do, they had to check each other's counting. So it was just that sort of thing, and we had a good laugh, and we made teams together, and we did, and people won chocolates, and they had to sort of share it, but they had a laugh. They learnt some more about finance, and it just gave them a bit of a break from the kind of day-to-day stuff. So we also encourage people to think differently about emails. If you're copied in, don't worry about it. If it's really desperate, they'll ring you. And I personally stopped responding to emails for 2 weeks. I tell you what, those 14 days were the longest of my life. I kept going through them thinking, is everything, is there anything I need to look at? And there wasn't. I responded to 25 out of the 200 and something that I had in that time frame. took quite a bit of guts. I had a bit of support from DNA because I was like, you sure this is a good idea? It seemed like a good idea. And it worked really well, and it stopped people copying in as a back covering exercise as much as anything. You know, actually, what is the purpose of that email? Who needs that email? At the end of the day, if something happens, you still have sent that email to the right person. So that would never be an issue. We tried to introduce more positive culture, like I said, about looking at compliments and ensuring that they were kind of noted, and I trusted the staff to do the job. We also developed our own web page on our intranet, so only Children's Services staff could see, but it was about things that were positive, stuff about law and policy, stuff about changes, training, anything they wanted on it, they put on it. I didn't have any editorship of it. It wasn't limited to people. Everybody who was in Children's Services could upload whatever they liked, and they all did a really good job. I was a bit kind of worrying. We also changed recruitment processes. We moved away from the 6 questions and the PowerPoint presentation. We did an engaged group of staff and potential people who were hoping to join the authority. We did the same questions, but we did it in activity-based. We still saw how they worked in a group. Nobody works in isolation. Why do we sit and interview them 1-to-1 or 1-to-2? So we did lots of things around that. We did lots of stuff about written work so we could see how they would write, because we have to do a lot of writing in Children's Services. And it was really positive. And actually we got really good feedback from people who hadn't got jobs and people who had got jobs, so that was really good. I think I spent probably 80% of my time resolving barriers during this 6-month period. And kind of the key task was to, I think it's something that I learnt more than anything, was that if there's things that aren't working, so if staff aren't working and not able to perform because of whatever reason, it kind of sucks the life out of the rest of the team. So you have to deal with those thorny issues that you have to get hold of, you have to do that. I don't like sacking people, essentially. But sometimes you have to, or you have to have very frank conversations with people. And so the workforce found it positive that those things that had been going on for years and years and years were stopped. I didn't enjoy it, but it helped us move on and get to where we wanted to. So your next question. Progressing change can often develop from ideas that are really small but effective. What could your team, or what can you do as a worker differently tomorrow that you've not been doing today or yesterday when you left your job? You've got 4 minutes. If a staff member came up with an idea, we implemented it then or very nearly then. An example of this is for a child to see their birth parents while they're in care. Something that takes place is called Contact. We pay for families to come to Contact. And so what would happen is there's 3 pieces of paper, 3 signatures required, and then you have to travel to and travel back. And I mean, there was a partridge in the pear tree. It just went on and on, this process, you know. And so we stopped that by staff saying to me, do you know what would really help? Because Monmouthshire's rural, you know, there's lots of towns in it. If you're ever across the bridge, it's a really nice place to stop. And it was a lot of travelling, a lot of time spent doing that. So the staff said to me, couldn't we take a small float of money with us? Because the other risk is, of course, if you're kind of in social care and you're carrying money around, word might get out. So we agreed they could keep a small amount of money. I said, yep, go and check the finance, make sure it doesn't breach a rule. They had to account for every penny, don't get me wrong. National Audit Office back of the room. It was accounted for, I promise. But do you know what? We reduced the mileage costs. We reduced the time spent of workers going back and forth with bits of money and bits of paper. And that was simply somebody had the idea. They came up with other ideas. I thought, it ain't never going to work. Never said it. They tried it and it did. You know, I'm in a very different position to actually my staff out there doing their job. Some of the things didn't work. And by realising it didn't work, it saves people again going over and over the history of the managers didn't let us do this, the managers wouldn't let us do that. And that created that thing of we are listened to, we give it a go. If we don't all agree with it, we won't do it. And that worked really well. So just to give you a few of the outcomes, because we're in social care, we're a bit obsessed with our outcomes. The staff worked kind of more effectively together, still some people not on the page, and some who weren't on the page came up to, I was having one particularly bad day, And one of the guys that was kind of quite, I think it goes back to your discussion about IT, and when you move people out of the system, I kind of left them in the system for a while, and just hoped that the balance would tip so that they would kind of be on board because other people in the organisation were on board. And this one person who was part of a little group who were very negative came up to me one day and said, "Can I talk to you?" And I thought, you know what, no, because I'm having a really rubbish day. Yes, of course. Come and have a sit down. And so I sat down. Good job I was sat down. He said, "I want to apologise to you. I'm kind of in a partly management role, and I realise what you're doing, and I was very negative, and I'm really sorry. And I'm going to talk to the other people that have been really negative." And from that day on, I had no problem. And it was kind of letting them, like you say, work through their anxiety, work through their fear, because there's often when you're making change, a job's going to go, what does it mean for me, those sorts of things. And that was quite hard work to do. Children were supported more creatively. What I found was that staff did not know how to engage children in play. The only way to understand young children and children who have been abused is what they're giving you back through play. For example, if they colour in very dark colours, their life is very dark for them at that point. And if you're getting them to use different colours, you're moving them on. That's kind of how you understand young children. There's lots of strategies that are used. So I sent them all off for 2 days to learn indoor and outdoor play. And they came back and they said it was the best training course they ever got to go on. I didn't get near the Play-Doh, but they had a great time, you know, and they spent time together, had a bit of a break from the day job, and had loads of ideas about how to engage children. And it's like, you know, there was one child that wanted to learn to play golf. And the worker used to take them to the driving range. They'd be on the driving range having a conversation. And the worker used to say to me, I knew whether that person was good or bad as how far the ball went. Because it was an indication that isn't about, if you just sat that girl down, said, so how's it going? How do you feel? Because we like to know that in social care. She wouldn't have told us anything. So it's kind of trying to do things differently so we could engage those children. This one appalled me. 74% improvement in KPIs. I asked them to concentrate on 5. They improved 32. And so anybody know what the downside of that improvement in 1 year is? You've got to do it again and again and again. And I sat there in front of members going, I know it's really positive. That's really good. But the thing is, I knew the children coming through. I knew the ones who were absconding. I knew that it would be more for next year, so some of our KPIs would drop. And at the end of the day, as I said to a lot of people, KPIs will not keep a child safe. It's just a tool to analyse it. So I had to work with the kind of senior people to say, this might not be this good next year. And it wasn't. But we did our best. We doubled our compliments, and in children's services, I expect to get complaints because we're removing children, very distressing circumstances. Families don't always agree with that, so you always will get complaints. But we doubled our compliments to about 25 in just under a year. We used to get about 1, maybe 2. So we were getting professional compliments from court, we were getting professional compliments from other agencies, we were getting feedback from young people, they were drawing us pictures, all those sorts of things that were telling us we were doing things more effectively. We improved our profile internally and externally, and that helped a lot. We weren't kind of being questioned all the time about thresholds, and the staff group even won a competition around continuous improvement in local government, and they were very pleased with that, and it kind of said, yeah, we're doing all right. And my chief exec, as you remember, he said at the beginning, I'm not investing in you. I've got a few million as a result of the work that I did. And I was so proud of my staff group. When I told them this one day, they immediately said to me, where's the money coming from? What's going to have to stop somewhere else? Is it right it stops somewhere else? And that's what I wanted to see. They were completely engaged in their job, and not only their job, but the wider organisation. So we had a really good outcome from that. And you probably want to know what happened with the follow-up inspection. They came back just over 7 months later. They came for 2 weeks, and they came with 6 inspectors, and they did 2 different inspections at once. It was a fabulous fortnight in my life. And when they come in like that, they're generally going to write you a letter about special measures, and that's what we were prepared for. It was a very inconsistent inspection, which didn't help the staff. And what appalled my staff the most was they were coming back to me after their interviews with the inspector saying, I told them all the stuff they wanted to know, but they didn't ask how the child was. They didn't ask what the outcome for the child was. I said, well, you tell them. You tell them what the outcome for the child was. And the inspectors in the feedback going, they're very positive, and they're very keen to say what the outcome for the child is. And I said, well, that's kind of what we're here for, isn't it? The outcome for the child. So I wanted them to go away in a caring way for 6 months so that we could evidence that we'd made further progress, but they didn't come back. They said they didn't need to come back. They were satisfied that we were meeting the requirements, and I can't tell you how happy we all were, but the pressure of that inspection was such that they came and gave the verbal feedback. The other thing is, what you get verbally isn't always quite what you get written. But it took me till about 5 o'clock that afternoon. I was sat at home with my feet up, and I said to my husband, they're not coming back. And he's like, what, who, when, what? I said, they're not coming back. And so he was like, oh, the inspectors. He knew what I was thinking about, because it kind of been, he'd had to live with this inspection process for quite some time. So what I wanted, I kind of given you a bit of a whistle-stop talk, because we did a huge amount in a very short space of time. And if you've got any questions, that's fine. But what I wanted to leave you with is, I'm often heard to say that the only certainty in social work is change. And the key performance indicators are a good example of that. They will rise and fall, as I've said, and will be largely dependent on the cohort of children and young people going through the system at any given point, as much as it is dependent on my social workers inputting information into the correct box. Can't tell you how much of our lives we spend sorting that out. What we do need, though, is a workforce who are trusted and supported in their role to provide services and see children and enable them to have a positive future, because seeing the child is what's important to them. It's often why people go into social work and what makes them come to work every day. They want to do a good job, but we need to support them from a leadership position to ensure that happens, and that's the responsibility of me as a leader. That's all. Has anybody got any questions?